I thought I'd pick some autumnal colour. Look at that autumnal colour. Doesn't that just sum up autumn?
Lovely.
So I'm particularly keen on some of these roses that I've really learnt about through Instagram. So I've got Honey Dijon and Belle Époque.
Belle Époque is the most fantastic colour.
Yeah, especially it's the back of Belle Époque, which is the most fantastic colour. It's the way it's one thing in the middle and then it's another thing on the outside, and I love that. I also love Coco Loco, although actually, funnily enough, a girl friend came around the other day and she looked at my Coco Loco. She was like, oh, they're horrible, they make me feel sick.
Hello and welcome to episode 65 of Talking Dirty. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, looking very demure in his grey and yellow, we have Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist.
And from a cloudy Norfolk to a sunny Cambridgeshire, we have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredriksson, looking absolutely delightful. I love your stripy jumper. That's good.
Very stripy. Anyone who's watching the video, you'll notice that I pointed with the hand different to normal because the other one's trapped underneath the dog. Alan's got his pup on his lap as well, and Val's cat. There's Margot. Val, your cat's just gone off to the vets, or might be on your lap. I don't know.
No, gone off to the vet with a poorly paw.
Get well soon. Is it Frank the cat?
Frank, he's the new rescue cat. Joe and I decided to get another cat. We made a list. We said we're going to get a smooth-haired female who's young. And we went there and we fell in love with Frank, who is a very ragged ginger Tom of indiscriminate age. And Ned, who was the refuge manager at the RSPCA, he said to Joe, which cat are you going to have? And Joe said, the most inappropriate one. And he is very beautiful. But we let him out for about, we kept him in for 4 weeks, let him out, and he disappeared for 3 days. We had to lure him back with pilchards. He loves his pilchards.
Pilchards, the secret weapon.
Pilchards in tomato sauce. Apparently they train them to go through cat flaps with that. So
I quite understand that because I'm quite partial to a pilchard in tomato sauce myself.
Yes. It was a disaster a few weeks ago because none of the supermarkets had any.
I haven't had that for ages. I think you might have just inspired me to add something to my shopping list. Now, Val, of course, the last time we saw you was in person. We actually bumped into you on Main Avenue at Chelsea. You were hollering down, Alan Gray.
Yes.
And I thought, who is this bad person hollering my name? Turned around.
I hadn't got the energy to catch up because I had to get up at 4 o'clock to get the train.
You were rather laden down with bags and things, I think.
Well, I know people give you things, don't they? And then you
do, yes.
Know. And not only do you feel completely wasted by about 3 PM because you're so tired, you also look like a bag lady, despite your best efforts.
Yeah, always. Did you walk away from Chelsea with any particular inspiration, Val?
Yes, I did. And actually it's connected to my FLOMO. So I'm probably going to be mysterious here.
Wow.
And make you wait. But I did definitely get some inspiration. On the whole, I was disappointed. I thought that the gardens still relied far too much on flower at a time when sea heads and all the autumn colours can be beautiful. And there's that sort of balance of decay and decadence in gardens, isn't there?
Yes.
I've got to that age myself, actually, decay and decadence.
I was just going to say, isn't it marvellous how the older you get, the more you appreciate it?
Yes. And the alternative's not much better, is it?
No, it's not.
So you hang in there.
Perhaps celebrating decay and decadence on the podcast today, I should give you a proper introduction, Val. Award-winning garden writer, organic gardener.
I have 2 shortlists this year for the awards.
Oh, very
exciting. I'm really pleased about that.
Probably award-winning again then. Val, Iris-born, I believe, regular, beloved of this podcast. We love talking plants with you because your knowledge is so vast. You're just such a great plants woman. So thank you for coming back. Did you have an easy time picking your show and tell today? Were you spoilt for choice?
Well, I've got to the stage when the garden is really winding down. And because I was spreading leaf litter, and when I looked at the leaf litter bin, I thought there's not very much in there. I'll just put it on my trilliums and my hepaticas, and I probably won't have much room for anything else. But I had this 20 barrow loads of leaf litter.
Well done.
So I've been cutting down hellebores probably far too early. So
it's always better to do a job when you think about it than not to do it at all, Val.
Yes. Well, the thing is, I couldn't see where the hepaticas were and the trilliums were with all the hellebore foliage.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the question was now. You see,
No, I just wondered whether picking your show and tell had been easy or not.
Oh yes, it had been fairly easy. This is a rather sort of sad-looking bit of stem, but one of the things I actually cut down was Euphorbia griffithii, Fireglow, which is an alum bloom plant. There's also a slightly shorter one called Dixter, and this is one of those herbaceous euphorbias that sort of comes up in April, and you get these wonderful asparagus-like spears, and then you get the olive green foliage, and then you get these wonderful orange bracts, fiery bracts, and I grow it in one of my quadrants because it can ramble about. But I had never appreciated what colour the stems go, and this is just a short length because of course I cut it down and I put it on the compost heap, and I looked at the compost heap this morning and thought, I'm not going in there, not dressed like this. So I just cut a short length to show that wonderful coral pink colour that was highlighted against evergreen daphnes. And because it's one of those ones that pops up every now and again and just sort of raises its head, I'm really fond of this plant because, it's got a presence in the garden for months on end.
I agree with you, Val, because I think this is one plant that is very good at happy accidents.
Yes.
In my garden, I grew it in a gravel bed, and it was growing next to a dwarf formium with pink and sort of olivey green stripes on the leaves, and that stem and those leaves complemented each other so much. It was just delightful.
It is lovely. I used to have it in my old garden in quite a dank corner, and it doesn't mind dank corners. It is Himalayan, the actual species, but it seems to be able to cope really well in shade. And I had it next door to that yellow-leaved Philadelphus.
Oh, yes.
And when you saw the combination of the orange flowers and sort of acidy yellow, it did look really, really good. And if you had a few dark tulips nearby, it was just made a lovely trio. And I really like the euphorbias, particularly the, sorry about the pinging. I don't know how to stop it.
Very popular.
I like these perennial euphorbias that sort of die down to nothing. And I grow polychroma, which is now epithymoides, which is the foot-high one that flowers in April. And you get that wonderful acid yellow pouffe. It was so good with little blue bulbs and bluebells and things. And I like palustris, which is taller, which I've got along the back of one of my very sort of dank walls, because they face south of walls, but this is on the north-facing side. And it's with blue Symphytum caucasicum and Digitalis lutea. And it's just an easy thing to allow to happen.
What a great combo.
Yeah, it is nice. I'm very fond of this shrub. I don't grow that many shrubs with in perennial borders because I don't have as much room as my friend Mr. Gray there. We're going on to acre envy again, Alan. Cotinus Coggygria, royal purple. It is very, very available, readily available. But it's just one of those great shrubs because it's hanging onto its leaves. They were purple in summer. Now they've gone this sort of muted colour. And when it gets cold, it starts to develop shocking pink flecks in my garden. And it's very good at setting off grasses. Grasses are beige. They're boring, rather. But if you've got them close to this and you've got the silvery plumes close to these wonderfully dark leaves. And I like Miscanthus, and I grow quite a few of them. But I also grow some of the Miscanthus that don't flower. And I think this is Cosmopolitan. And I say that because there's actually two that are really identical, Cosmopolitan and Cabaret. and the variegation is reversed in one. But I think this is Cosmopolitan.
It is Cosmopolitan. You're absolutely right. I got it, and I've got it in flower, believe it or not.
Well, it doesn't flower here because we're so cold. But you can see that these two together, they really do they're on the corner of the border, in the sort of far southwest corner, close to the fields. And they make a really, really good combination. I like these sort of foliage Miscanthus as well.
Actually, that Miscanthus, you're right, it does flower with me because I'm warmer than you. But conversely, the yellow-leaved Philadelphus, wherever I put it in this garden, vast acreage as it is, it always scorches.
Does it? Well, I used to have this in the shade of a rose that I planted, which I should never have planted. You know, you plant things and you think, I should never have planted that. And you can't quite get the energy to take it out. And this was Wickwar, a rose with grey foliage, thousands of thorns, lots of hips. And everybody at the time was raving about this wonderful rose. And I planted it and it grew into a triffid, even on thin Hook Norton soil where I was. But
is that, could I just ask a question? Is that why you moved, Val? No. I moved because the best beloved and I needed to get a house together because we had two houses and we were only ever in one. So we decided we would buy a house together, but we couldn't find one that we liked. I liked it, he didn't like it. It's a long story. I won't go into the saga. Just thank God you both agreed in the end.
No, he bought it at auction without telling me. Just as I sold my house, and I was due to move on the Friday, and on the Wednesday he went off at auction and bought this cottage.
Well, did you have words about that?
Well, he took me out here at 11 at midnight. It was frosty and starlit, and said, we're going to live here. And actually it was really derelict. And if I'd seen it in daylight, I don't think I would have moved in. That is so typically Joe.
He's canny, your fella.
He panicked.
Going back to Cotinus, I was just going to say to you, there's an awful lot of new varieties of Cotinus, and they're all so good, including one that has yellow foliage. Now that I can grow, it doesn't scorch on my soil.
That's Smokey Joe?
Smokey Joe.
There's one called Smokey Joe, which I can't get. And there's Grace, isn't there? Which is, there are lots of different ones. I think they're really good shrubs because they leaf up late. So I can grow lots of sort of snowdrops underneath without them being, coming into leaf too early. And because they hang on to their leaves right into November, you've still got that block of colour there. I'd grow more if I had the acreage.
Can I ask a beginner Cotinus question, which is, for the first time, a few branches, the leaves went really crispy. So most of my Cotinus, which is only a few years old, so it's not massive, but most of it's looking lovely. But there are just a few branches. I don't know if it's drought or disease or what it is, but I noticed a couple of others doing it, and I've never had that happen before.
Well, I think it was a miserable year. I wouldn't panic too much. It was a very cold April. It was a very dull May. And then we had that hot weather in June. Things came into leaf late. So I'd give it the benefit of the doubt for another year.
I cut one off and it was very much alive in there.
I do hack mine about, but I do like it to flower because it's called a smoke bush because it has these very fluffy inflorescences. I must get it right. And, they're almost like a heat haze. They're sort of soft pink. But by the time the grasses come out in August, those inflorescences, so those fuzzy bits, have begun to fade and go a sort of beigey brown, and they really pick up the grassy, heads of things like Calamagrostis and all the other things. So there's a sort of relationship between them, and it's almost like a fragile, I don't know, gossamer covering.
It is. But conversely to that, if you wanted to, I mean, if you're growing, if you're having a tropical border or an exotic border or something like that, if you get one of the very dark-leafed Cotinus and you stool them, You cut them back to a stump, you'll get huge wands of the most wonderful, wonderful foliage.
Yes.
You won't get any flowers, but you'll get the foliage.
People who want really luscious foliage do that, at the expense of flowers. So it just depends on what you want. But the foliage on Cotinus is particularly amazing, I think.
Yeah, they're absolutely beautiful. And you're right that if you want to get a lot out of a small space in terms of your spring bulbs as well, then they're on your side.
Yes, and of course all those autumn things, they come up quite late.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice to have that fresh leaf when you've got, new perennials coming up. And I've got quite a lot of dark-leaved asters there, which are rambling everywhere actually and need attention.
Don't worry, one of my asters, or I suppose Symphytrichums, whatever they are, had just completely splayed this year. I need to get in there and sort that out. But
yes,
it was looking, so it had so many flowers. I didn't want to deal with it too early, so it's just bald.
Well, if it's a consolation, I've had more floppy things this year than ever, and that was that dry spell.
Oh,
It was really dry here, and I mean normally we get rain coming up the Bristol Channel, but we didn't this summer. No, so
Isn't
it
it
was dry.
strange? It is strange, isn't it? Because I think in our garden that things have grown exceptionally tall.
Yes, yes.
It's very odd. And yet I was talking to, when we spoke to Bleddon Wyn Jones, he actually said that plants were about half the size that they should be in Wales. And I always think that, the western side and to some extent Gloucestershire, where you are, Val, you get much higher rainfall than we do.
Yes, I mean, I think probably it was the temperatures that affected Blethin's garden, because my daughter went to Bangor. So I was a regular visit to Blethin's garden and nursery, and also the gardens around Anglesey and on that Menai Strait area. And they get this warm wind that comes down from Snowdon, and it sort of bathes the whole area in this wonderful warm spring air. And I think it would have just been missing this year.
Yeah,
It's extreme cold. So I think probably they get much more growth than we do. In fact, I have killed a lot of Blethin's plants in the heart of England because actually, we're just too cold for a lot of the things that are collected in Taiwan and places like that. That Asian plants want a dry winter and a wet summer, and we deliver the other one. We deliver wet winter, dry summer, and I think that's a problem for us.
Literally the opposite to what they want. I mean, I obviously it's been at various points a generally dreadful year in terms of temperature, and months back we talked about trying to grow Lord Anson's pea. Now I assume, Alan, you had great success with your Lathyrus. Is it nervosa?
Yes, Lathyrus nervosa. I had a complete failure with it.
Yes.
But that's what happens. I mean, it's a miffy thing at the best of times. And I think probably I did a bit of research on it, and it sounds as if what it really likes is to scramble around in some very gritty, gravelly, rocky areas. So I'd earmarked it for planting in the desert, which is just gravel and sand and subsoil and that sort of thing. But I didn't get any germination whatsoever. I think it was bad seed, and I'm not saying it just because, but I mean, I had 3 packets from 3 different sources, so and they just didn't emerge. So I don't know. I
grew mine in a propagator, and I managed to get germination. I gradually sort of lost them, but I ended up with 2, but they just didn't grow very well at all. They certainly didn't flower, but having persevered so hard with these plants in my tiny plot, I've dug one up very carefully because I assumed it might dislike root disturbance, and I've put it in my downstairs bathroom on the windowsill, and it is happy as Larry.
Yes,
it sent up another shoot. I don't know whether it's going to continue to grow happily, but it hasn't resented the move at all, and it seems to be enjoying the warmth. So I'm wondering whether just the fact that we had the cold spring, whether I was just a bit doomed with my Lathyrus nervosa.
Yes, and also it was a very cool August, as I can testify from my holiday in Cromer, where it reached the dizzy heights of 14 degrees on most days. Even my grandchildren wouldn't go in the sea.
I think the day that you came to visit me, it was one of the coldest days in August that we'd had ever.
Yes.
It was almost winter coat weather, wasn't it?
Well, we'd had a worse day than that, actually. We had one day where we'd been to a beach that they'd actually closed it because of the rough sea. and the biting northerly wind. We tried to walk the dog across the sand, and we did about a mile and turned back.
You're lucky to have done that.
We had cool weather here in August as well. I think it was pretty general.
Yes, it was.
So anyway, I've moved my pea inside. It seems to be appreciating some central heating, weirdly. And we'll see. I'll keep you updated whether I actually ever get any success with this plant, but I'm persevering.
And I think, having had this conversation, I should make a note to self to redouble my efforts.
Yes. Put it in your bathroom.
Yes.
Yes.
That's where it wants to be.
I mean, this is another shrub I really like. I don't grow loads of shrubs because I haven't got that much room. I'm so jealous. But this is Euonymus Red Cascade. And actually, there are some shoots in the border that are a real lipstick pink. And I really like this shrub because it's actually, it actually has a sort of tiered habit where it puts out sort of
that's nice.
branches, you know, a bit like Viburnum Cotitus. But it is sort of almost tiered, and it stays fairly small where it is anyway. And there are lots of red fruits on it at this time of year, but I didn't want to pick them, so I picked just a leafy shoot. But I think Euonymus, they have such a way of colouring up. A lot of the I've got Plumnepes in the garden, and that drops its foliage pretty quickly in September. But this one hangs on to it, and actually it's got a really nice sort of winter bark as well. So I think if you wanted a smallish shrub, you know, to give you some colour, this Red Cascade, Euonymus Red Cascade, would be very good.
I'm feeling a bit tempted by that Euonymus.
Yes,
that might just gone on to my
this is looking
list.
rather ragged, but I've got a lot of hardy chrysanthemums, and they're quite floppy this year. And this one is Ernest Wilson. I think there's a middle name and a middle initial, but you'll get there with Ernest Wilson.
Ernest H. Wilson, I think.
Yeah, it might be E.H.Wilson, but it's certainly named after the explorer who introduced all those wonderful Chinese plants at the beginning of the 20th century. And
of course, with our weather changing, as well, it is very changeable anyway. But I think it's also sensible to go for a late display, because quite often, especially on the eastern side of the country, our autumns are quite benign, and these flowering hardy chrysanthemums, they really come into their own. And I've just been noticing various nurseries on the internet. They've got loads of varieties today. We've got the Emperor of China. And
that's a beautiful one.
Yes, it's tall, and its leaves go beetroot red, as the pink flowers unravel. The pink flowers are slightly sort of messy, which lends a lovely casual air to it. And this year, I've allowed it to flop, and it looks so much better being allowed to flop than it does if it's trussed up, because all you see is, ugly legs.
Yes.
Allow it to flop, the flowers come up like a swan's neck, and they smile at you, and it looks absolutely lovely.
Yes, there's a national collection at Warwick. Yeah. Excuse me, at Hill Close Gardens, and they sell a lot, but you have to actually, I think, go there. But they sell an awful lot of hardy chrysanthemums, and I've got some on the allotment. What I do is I've got an autumn border, and on the sort of southeastern edge, it's curved. Along the southeastern edge, I grow colchicums, which I know Alan has a national collection of. And they start with Nancy Lindsay, and then they go on. And I've got things like Benton End and Glory of Three, which is the most magnificent, slender, sort of pinky purple. It's almost like a champagne flute with a purple stem. And then behind that, I've got Hesperantha, different Hesperanthas in shades of pink. And the colchicums start first, and then the Hesperanthas, and then the hardy chrysanthemums come out next. And it's not a tidy edge, but at this time of year, it's absolutely wonderful to go out and see fresh flower late in the year. And more or less the colchicums have gone now, but the Hesperanthas are still in full flow, and some of the chrysanthemums aren't even out yet. So there's still things in the garden. Some of the roses are absolutely fantastic at this time of year. And this one is a rose called Pearl Drift, which is Bill the Grice rose. I really like this in September and October, because it always does the most fantastic show. And because I'm organic, I have to have very healthy roses that don't get black spot. And this is healthy.
Yeah, those leaves are so green and glossy.
Yeah, this is a low a sort of low mound and this wonderful silver pink colour, and it has these, it's insect friendly, obviously, but it has these wonderful pink buds. I really rate this rose, and it wasn't available for a bit, but it's crept back into the lists now. People like Trevor White have it.
It's also a very easy rose to grow from your own cuttings. If you're good with cuttings, I've grown quite a few of that particular variety from cuttings. And as you say, it is, once you've seen it, I think you realise that if a rose can look good at this time of the year, it's got to be a good one, because it is disease-free, very healthy looking, wonderful.
It's got sort of cakey perfume. It's not... I wanted to show you this one as well, which is always good at this time of year, and this one's called Pippin. And this is a big shrub rose. And this was actually named after Peter Beals, because when Peter Beals was a baby, he had cheeks like Cox's orange pippins. And this was his nickname. And not long before he died, the nursery introduced this rose, which opens a strawberry pink. And it's a big rose. You need room for this one. Very healthy foliage, as you can see. And there's always throws some late flowers. It's always very good. I have those big roses along my south-facing wall. So I've got things like gardenia, the generous gardener, and they go over the wall, and it all goes really well until the donkeys are put in the field, and then they help me with my pruning. But you can't have everything in life. But Pippin, I really rate, and I was so fond of Peter. We used to go to Japan together to lecture for many years. And he was a really good rose man, Peter Beals.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful rose. Really lovely one. Have you got more?
No, I think I've done now.
Well, I'm not an autumn snowdrop person, but I was anticipating some kind of autumn snowdrop from you.
I have got some autumn snowdrops, but I don't want to pick.
You won't cut them, yeah?
No. I've got Tile Barn Jamie out.
Yes. Yay.
It never does very well for me. Tile Barn Jamie was named after Peter Moore's nursery. Peter Moore had a nursery in Kent, and he grew all sorts of interesting cyclamen, but he obviously went collecting in the wild. And this is a form of Reginae olgae. And that's probably the only form that I can grow. But it doesn't do that well for me. I don't really think we're warm enough here for that particular autumn type of snowdrop. But I've got one called November, which is up about that much. Last year I had Ruby's Green Dream, which was out, but it's coming up this year. And the other one I've got is one I bought in a garden centre called Autumn Magic. And it was labelled an Elwesii, which it isn't, but it does flower really, really well. It's got about 20 flowers on it. But I don't do that well with the autumn ones.
How's going over at East Ruston with your autumn snowdrops then, Alan?
Well, Tile Barn Jamie actually does like us. And I think probably Val is absolutely right. It's because we're slightly warmer. And Tile Barn Jamie has increased rather well. I'm pleased with it, put it that way. It's not huge, but it's increased rather well. I've got 2 clumps of it, and I've got about, I suppose, 10 or 12 flowers on each clump. So that's quite nice. There are others that I have, which unfortunately... Reginae olgae, they may be, but I don't know the names of them. But some of them are tiny little minuscule things. And I really feel that to appreciate them, perhaps they should be grown in an alpine trough or something like that. And that gives you a clue to my Flomo.
Oh, well, we'll come to Flomo in a bit. So, Val, would you say that you'll just generally want to be in a warmer part of the country and choosing your kind of warm spot for autumn snowdrops if you want to get into them?
I think they do need a warm spot. I think they need good drainage. But I also think they need moisture, because one of the things that, because we're high here, where I've got Tile Barn Jamie, it gets a lot of sun because we face south, and our soil dries out. There is no clay content at all in our soil. It's black and it's dark, but it's quite hungry soil. And I think people with better soil, perhaps with a clay content, or have got gardens that are lower near a water table. I've got a friend in Bolton on the Water. She does really well with autumn flowering snowdrops because she's right by the river. I can never remember. I think it's the Windrush, right by the river. And she's got a lot of, residual dampness in the soil. There was no sign of tile balm Jamie until it rained about a week ago. Sorry, you must excuse my throat. I think I might be allergic to Frank, but I'm not admitting it. Yeah, so we don't do as well with those, but we do have a lot of early snowdrops. There's one called Don Sims Early, which always does well for me. That's not showing yet, but I would imagine it's going to be imminent, especially now I've been clearing off all the sort of perennials and everything where the snowdrops are. A lot of my snowdrops are under roses. And so at this time of year, with these roses, particularly the taller ones that have got a lot of foliage, I take them down to about halfway in November because we're windy and it stops the wind rocking them. And that helps the snowdrops come up as well.
That's a very good tip, Val, because I think we are increasingly windy on this island of ours.
Yes.
And I think if people to actually bore that in mind, to actually cut back your roses by half before you prune them properly, whenever you choose to do that, that'll stop the wind rock. And if you would often get a plant, if it suffers from wind rock, where the stem actually goes into the soil, it will make a large hole, which is like a reservoir, and it can cause rot and it can lead to the death of the plant. So it's a very good tip. Well done.
Yes, well, we have to do it here because we do get windrock and we do get those gaps. But the other thing is, if I've got a rose, I don't keep roses that aren't healthy, but I have been known, if I'm trying a rose and we've had a particularly wet summer and I'm sort of on the cusp of not knowing what to do with it and it's got black spot or some disease leaf, at this time of year, I will not prune it, but I will remove every leaf because they come away really easily if they're slightly, I don't ever get
on the way to die
very badly, but I sometimes get spotting. And I will spend time taking the leaves off a rose like that and making sure that I collect them round. But I won't prune anything until after Christmas.
I love your knowledge. I was reading an article of yours. Did you do one recently about seed sowing?
Yes.
And it was just brilliant. There were so many little snippets. I think it was one of your Telegraph articles.
Yes.
Just so many little tips or ways of understanding plants. You were talking about things like if you wanted to sow a biennial and it wants to sort of make its rosette of leaves so that it can get through the winter. It was all just made so much sense. And
thank you very much. I do wonder if anybody reads anything that you write, because you spend so long in your study clacking away when you really would rather be out there. But it's nice to know that.
Well, it was actually, I read it and it occurred to me, I should probably share the link somehow, because we had one of our podcast viewers in Australia. He's actually quite new to gardening and growing from seed. And they were like, I'd love you to do a sort of seed sowing special. I don't expect you to regale us with the entire article, but there were so many sort of really insightful points in that article. Your top seed sowing, particularly at this time of year, I suppose, though actually in Australia that's irrelevant, so maybe discount that. But your sort of top.
I think it's
top
really
pointers.
recognizing that plants want to spurt into growth at the right time. So if you've got an annual that's going to flower in the summer, a lot of them will want to grow in the spring. So it's really worth saving your own annual seeds and then planting them in the spring. There are exceptions. Umbellifers are better planted in the autumn. But when you come to a biennial, that's only going to flower in its second growing year. It's very complicated. So you want to sow it in about the beginning of July, that sort of time here anyway, and then get a nice plant to put out in September. And then it'll overwinter as a rosette, and then it will flower. And if you really want a run of biennial plants, whether it's something like Smyrnium perfoliatum, which is the most wonderful acid yellow umbellifer for sort of bright shade, you really need to sow 3 years running to keep that succession going, because you're going to have these gaps. And if you're leaving them to self-sow, those seedlings probably won't germinate till the following spring. So it's always worth treating biennials in the way that you're going to plant 3 lots of them if you want to keep them going. And then with perennials, well, they're designed to, they're going to live a long time. Most of them want to germinate in the spring. So but because they have short viability, the seeds, perennial seeds are the worst, I think, for having short viability, actually. You put them in as soon as they're ripe in most cases, and then you just overwinter them because they often need a cold shock and stratification, and then they'll germinate in that spring, but they won't always germinate in that spring. And I think in that article, I remember writing about a tray of cyclamen seeds that I had on the front of Woman's Weekly or something in the days when they were giving things away. I think it was Woman's Weekly, and I thought I'll sow that. And it was in the 1980s, and I sowed it, and I waited 2 years, and nothing came up, and I got impatient. So I just tipped it out into a hypericum right by the greenhouse. And about 2 years later, I had the most amazing array of cyclamen. Obviously, just wasn't right for them to germinate. So I think patience with perennials, definitely. Annuals are easy to store. They just want to germinate. They have to germinate to perpetuate. They're the easiest seeds of all to sow. Biennials are easy, but you need to time it. If you sow them in the spring, you might well get plants that are too big too early. You really want a nice, compact plant that you can put out to September. So it's just experience, really. And I have had things that have taken 8 years to flower. I've grown peonies and trilliums from seed. And what I put in the article is you could have your own family while you were waiting, but they cut that bit out.
I tell you what, one of the things that this is a story against myself because I didn't have the knowledge, but I remember years ago sowing seed of a variegated arum. I think it may have been Arum mamoratum that we had in the garden, and the seedlings came up like mustard and cress, and every single one of them had a plain green leaf. And I thought, well, these are no good, so they went on the compost heap. I was only to learn that only in their second year did they variegate.
I did that with trilliums, Alan, because trilliums are what are called hypergeal. So the first stage of germination happens under the ground. You don't see anything until the second year. And in the second year, they put out a linear leaf that looks a bit like a lily seedling. So I grew all these trillium seeds. I kept them for 2 years. They came up with linear seeds. I thought, they're wrong. I've got the label wrong. And I shoved them out. It was only when I saw in my own garden self-sown trillium seedlings, I thought, oh, you idiot. It's learning all the time, isn't it?
And I do think if you're new to gardening, like you just said about things self-sowing in the garden, I think that is probably the most exciting and the easiest way to grow some things is to maybe buy an initial plant of something that will set seed and let it set seed. And you can kind of observe what it does and you can dig them up. And I mean, obviously some things you can't transplant as easily, but lots of things, they're quite easy to move. And they're kind of easier to just let them get on with it in the garden. My self-sown Orlia grandiflora are always better than the ones I grow.
Yes, they are. I mean, I allow mine to self-sow. And last year I had a sort of forest. I think that sowing seeds is the most Harry Potter thing in gardening. I mean, it is, isn't it? You start off with a packet of seeds. I remember when I was a child having 10-week stocks.
Oh, yeah.
I've only been 6 or 7 and planting them along the path and then refusing to come in the summer until it was dark because I wanted to smell the 10-week phloxes or whatever they're called. And, getting into trouble because my mother wanted to get me into bed. But I was sitting on the doorstep resolutely waiting for this perfumed stock to release its fragrance. I was an awkward child.
That is such a wonderful insight into a little Val Bourne.
It is.
But I did find that article wonderful. I did feel heartened that you said umbellifers and Orlias were generally better sown in the autumn. And I'd followed that advice before I'd even read it from you. I don't know if I'd heard you say that, but I have tried that this year.
Yes.
And I think autumn sowing some things, it doesn't seem logical that you should be able to sow things in sort of, I don't know, August, September, even to October, November.
It is completely logical because when you think about it, your garden is developing weed seedlings in September and October all the time. So it's a very, very good time for sort of germination, isn't it?
Yeah. I think when you're a new gardener, you just get so indoctrinated that it's like spring is the time when things grow. It's quite hard to get rid of that.
I do very little bricking out, actually. I used to do it. Nice back-breaking job, isn't it? But now what I do is I use modular trays, 6x4 modular trays, and seed-sowing compost. And I just put a tiny pinch of things like African marigolds. I think I mean African marigolds, the nice ones.
Things like
and cosmos. I grow them in these modular trays, and then when they fill the plug, the modular plug, they go into a 3-inch pot, and then they're put out in the garden. And this year I grew one a plant which I'd call an annual, called Monarda lambada, which has purple bracts, and that is still in flower on my allotment among my dahlias. Monarda lambada, like the dance. That's brilliant. So I try new things every year. I know I'm still 6, I'm afraid.
That is the excitement of growing stuff from seed. That's why I'm so dedicated to my Lathyrus nervosa, because I tried it for the first time this year.
Yes, you've got to persevere.
I'm determined. And like you said about sowing in modules, I think this is a tip I got from Alan as well, is with some things, just sowing them. I think you said about Scholzias, Alan, because they resent root disturbance, actually just sow them in a little clump that you can move without disturbing them.
Yeah, I can't grow those well at all.
We do it with the ladybird poppy, because everybody loves the ladybird poppy, a really deep red poppy with black spots at the base of the petals, and we sow those in modules, and then we just and like you, Val, we prick them out when they filled their modules. They go into a slightly bigger pot and then into the garden, and it's a very good way of doing it. Yeah,
that has self-seeded for me in the past, the ladybird.
Yes,
and I grow a lovely white poppy called Sissinghurst White, which is a form of opium poppy, and it's a fairly pure white flower, single, with a green middle, and it was always grown in the white garden at Sissinghurst, and Sybil told me that they never called it anything apart from the white poppy, but now Chiltern Seeds are selling it as Sissinghurst White, and that's a lovely thing, and I allow some to self-seed, and then I sow some, but you have to be careful with poppies not to sow them too early. And it is knowing when to sow things as well. If you're dealing with a half-hardy annual that needs warm temperatures, it's a waste of time me sowing those until about the middle of April, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because I'm cold and they soon catch up. Things soon catch up. And you don't want the seeds sitting in cold compost. But if it's hardy annuals, I'm in there in the middle of March, and I will sow those and get those going. So I'm sowing in stages.
That's a sensible thing to do. I think one of the things about Papaver somniferum, Sissinghurst White, for instance, if you've got it in your garden, and if you have other Papaver somniferums, do be careful, because poppies are a promiscuous lot.
Well, this is a stable seed strain. That's
is it?
The usual thing about Sissinghurst White.
So it won't cross with the others?
Hasn't crossed in my garden, no.
Well, that's marvellous.
Yes. And occasionally you get a wonderful stand of, I had some ostrich double whites, and they're wonderful, and they were really fantastic, and then they just disappeared. I mean, that's the thing about opium poppies; they are promiscuous, but that is definitely a stable seed strain.
That's nice.
Yes,
good to hear.
And talking of when to sow things and not sowing things too early, you pointed out, I can't remember what it was, but going back to this article, something that had been sown, I think at Wisley in June.
We had an annual trial. We had a trial of annual plants on the trials field at Wisley amongst all the perennials. The one thing you noticed was that was the plot where all the pollinators were. You could hear the buzz before you got there. And that is even me with my ridiculous ears, I could hear it. It was alive with insect life. Now, they didn't actually sow any of those seeds. They sowed them direct, but they sowed them at the beginning of June. I can't sow direct in my garden. It doesn't work for me because I'm really working with small patches and they tend to get overshadowed. But if you've got a cutting garden where you can sow straight in, there are things like larkspur and bells of Ireland that you wouldn't be able to grow probably by raising plugs anyway. You know, you need to sow them straight into the ground, but don't do it early.
And actually, I mean, Alan, I don't know how your sweet peas got on that you sowed, I think, on the longest day, but the frustrated gardener who's featured regularly on this podcast, Dan Cooper, he sowed some things like antirrhinums, I think, on the longest day, and has got some wonderful autumn flowers as a result.
Yes. Well, I have a friend called Graham White, who is a very good gardener, and he used to grow show sweet peas, and he always used to sow his sweet peas on bonfire night, and he learnt that tip from the old sweet pea growers who were growing for exhibition. So he would, I've lost touch with him a bit, which is a shame, but he always used to say bonfire night, and I'm going to sow some on that around that date this year.
Alan, how did your late sowing go? Did it work at all?
It was disastrous. Well, I think,
darling.
I think what happened was the fact that we had such a cold August, and it was completely cold. I mean, I began to wonder whether we'd ever have sunshine again. Yes. And I think that really did for them. The plants are still there. They're looking healthy. We've had about 5 or 6 flowers. It was a sweet pea that I particularly wanted, and one again that I saw at Sissinghurst in the cottage garden.
Which one was it?
Henry Eckford.
Oh yes, that's an old one, Henry.
Yeah,
Eckford.
grandiflora.
Yeah.
And they had it in full flower on October the 4th. I know it was October the 4th because it was the date of the Dixter Plant Fair. And we did both.
Yes.
So, yes, I think that's I should try again, though, because, you know, just because it fails once, I don't think that should put anybody off. We all have things that fail. It doesn't matter. But, you know, if first you don't succeed, try again.
I think that's the other thing. Gardening is always swings and roundabouts. So you always get things that don't work.
Yeah.
And they don't work that year. And if you try them next year, they probably will work because, you know, conditions are different.
Yeah.
And I think in many ways, gardeners are very optimistic people because they're regularly confronted with failure and things haven't gone well. And I'll try that again next year.
Well, I think I always bear in mind my school reports when I walk around my garden, Val, and I think could try harder.
I was a terrible swot. I always worked really hard at school. You know, I was known for concentrating, you know, and drinking everything in.
Surely all of us got some sort of comment about talking too much, though.
I didn't talk very much, actually.
No,
I was very friendly with a girl called Anne, who was the star of the class. She was my best friend, and she did the talking for both of us. I became garrulous later.
Well, unsurprisingly, I got told off for talking too much. Before we move on to some FLOMO, can I ask if there are any specific sweet peas you'll be sowing on bonfire night, Val?
Well, I do like, there are certain ones I really always like to grow. One is Gwendolyn, which is a frilly pink, very strong, very easy to grow. I usually go one, I think it's called Our Harry. It's a blue, it's a lavender blue. I quite like Jilly, which was named after Jilly Cooper, which is a sort of cream colour.
I would have thought that. I would have thought that would have been red hot.
Red hot. In the good old days, Unwins used to christen sweet peas, and they would name them after people in August, and the people would come to a lunch. So I saw lots of people like Darcy Bustle and all sorts of people, Norman Wisdom at these lunches. I sort of don't grow. I do tend to stick to the sort of tried and tested ones, though. You know, I'm not very adventurous with sweet peas. I often grow Leamington, which is an old one, a sort of purplish one. And I often grow one called Mrs. Bernard Jones for sentimental reasons, because when I was a nursing cadet, Bernard Jones was our pharmacist. And he was one of the most famous people, and he once bought me a bunch of sweet peas, which I thought was lovely.
Aww.
So I normally find room for Mrs. Bernard Jones. I can't think of any other ones. I will have a look at the catalogue. I've got quite a lot of seeds saved and stocked. The interesting thing about sweet peas is they are pollinated self-pollinated in the pod, so you can always save sweet pea seeds and they will come true to variety. It's worth saving your own.
I want to say I didn't know that, but I only knew it from your article. I had my splash of complete epiphany reading your article. I didn't know that until I read it from you.
Yes. So
that is amazing.
I don't think the seed companies like to tell you that, but it is true. Seed crops are all grown up, fences are all, they're not all segregated. If they had trouble with cross-pollination, they'd have to have an insect net to keep out the bees. But no, they don't do that. So.
That's amazing. Well, I'm inspired. I will, on the video version, link to our sweet pea special that we did with Eastern Walled Gardens. There were more, even more, yet more.
Oh, I'm so jealous. I do love them. And I'm going to grow them this year. I haven't grown them for several years.
And actually, from that podcast, do go watch the whole podcast. But the other great tip was that they basically grow them on sort of tubes, don't they, of wire? Because rather than a wigwam where you just get all the stuff at the top, they do a nice sort of cylinder that you get that growth round.
Yeah. Well, one of the easiest ways of doing that is to buy a roll of deer netting. I say deer netting because deer netting is it's less robust and slightly more malleable than pig netting, but you can use pig netting if that's what you've got. And we make a tube of the netting, and then we have 3 tall bamboo canes which we thread through the netting and push those into the ground, and they hold it steady. And it's a very good way. We did this once when we had a few years ago. We did a trial of annual climbers, which we did in conjunction with the RHS. You may have seen them at Wisley Vale.
I did actually, yes. Yeah. I was so jealous of the epithymoides because I can't grow them.
Oh, really? Well, we had quite a good show that year because we were doing it in conjunction with the RHS, and I think we probably took a little bit more trouble about it. But we've used consequently those supports have been used for growing sweet peas on.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
I would love to have more room. Can I move to your garden, please?
Yeah.
Give me some of it.
It would love you here.
I'm sure you've got a few acres at the back that you could just give over to Val.
Yes.
Now, before we have to wind things up, we got very carried away with the seed chat, which hopefully was helpful to everybody. It was certainly helpful to me. FLOMO is our fun little feature, which captures that feeling all of us gardeners get when we see a plant and we have fear of missing out about it. I want it, we say. So mine came from your article because you mentioned Dictamnus albus.
Oh, yes.
And I don't have that, but just tell us about the seed heads in particular.
Well, they're like those star of anise capsules, actually, but they go through several stages. So you get the flowers, and there are white forms and purple forms. Mine is a sort of smoky purple. And they're sometimes called burning bushes because they give out this noxious gas, although I've never managed to light any noxious gases in the whole of my life. But apparently they do. That's probably in the heat of Greece or something. And then they sort of flower, and then they produce these star-shaped seed pods, which are quite furry and purple. And then they sort of turn into brown. Now, that is a plant I have terrible trouble raising from seed. So it doesn't produce masses of seeds. When you get these rather promising looking capsules, in my garden, you might get 1 or 2 seeds in each bit, but it's not laden with seeds. And I've just let them drop this year, and in the hopes that they will self-seed themselves, because I have completely failed in a pot. Some things you just can't get to grow. I can't get to grow Smyrnium perfoliatum in a pot, although other people can. So it is a wonderful plant. The only thing about it is it's quite susceptible to slug damage.
I do have a lot of molluscs.
I don't have a lot of molluscs, actually. I have a lot of ground beetles instead. But so I don't generally have problems with it, but you can get problems with it. I think the best thing to do is just keep an eye on it when the shoots are coming up, and perhaps put some grit round it or some bran round it, because obviously I'm not going to recommend pellets. But it's a slow fuse plant. It's going to take 5 years probably to, make a good clump. I don't know whether Alan agrees with that.
I do agree with you entirely. I think I've got one plant of it growing in the Mediterranean garden, and I've never really bothered planting anymore because it is such a slow plant.
It is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely.
Oh, well, one for the patient gardener.
My Flomo's for the patient.
Oh, okay. Well, it's all about patience on the podcast today, which is ironic, really, considering how impatient I am. And I think, Alan, you can sometimes be a little impatient.
I don't think I'm known for my patience either.
Val, what is your Flomo?
Well, I have got 2 Flomos, because when I went to Chelsea, I said that I wasn't impressed, but I was impressed by one garden, and that was the M&G garden.
Yes.
Designed by Hugo Bugg and Charlotte Harris. They had on it that autumn palette of seed heads, and one of the plants they used, because what they did is they kept all the plants they were going to plant in May and stuck with them. So they didn't go for a new lot of plants. So they had on their show, they had 2 plants I really loved. Amsonia illustris. Now, this is the Amsonia in my garden, and you can see it's got these dark pods and these yellow leaves. And this is Tabernae montana, I believe. But they had Amsonia illustris, which was shorter. But at Chelsea, although it was only the end of September, they already had these butter yellow leaves and dark pods, and I thought it was stunning. And with it, they had a pennisetum with very dusky flowers called Cassian's Choice. And Knoll Gardens sell it. And it was, pennisetums have fuzzy caterpillars, and they're quite difficult here. It's a form of Alopecuroides, so it's quite hardy. So I could grow that here. And I'm thinking of ordering some and, putting it round my Amsonia Tabernae montana, but I'm also wanting to get illustris. These Amsonias are a slow fuse thing. They have tiny little grey-blue stars in May, and they are very, very attractive. And they're one of the American prairie plants that seems to be able to cope with our drier summers. A lot of them, are hit and miss these days.
I tell you what, Val, did you notice also on that garden, Thordis and I noticed that there were some lovely seed heads from Tulipa sprengeri.
Oh, yes.
They'd actually used that. I thought,
yes.
Well, I just thought, how clever. They were obviously going to use them in the early part of the year.
Yes. I mean, my Tulipa sprengeri in about August gets sprinkled, but they will keep that shape, Tulipa sprengeri. And for those of you who don't grow it, it is a species bulb, and it will spread by self-seeding. It won't spread by offsets. So when you get a species bulb with 2 names like Psilocyberica, Narcissus cyclaminius, don't take the head off it. Let it self-seed, because that's the way it spreads. And Tulipa sprengeri here, there's 2 or 3 patches of it. The best patch is in actual semi-shade. It's popping up in a patch where I've got ferns, garden mint, and all sorts of other stuff. And it's perfectly happy. It's the last tulip to flower, and it's burnished red and gold. And it's a special favourite. So if you've got a friend who's got some, try and get some seed, because that's the way to start it off.
Yeah,
sprinkle it. Don't put it in a pot.
They are very expensive, so you can buy the bulb, but they are pricey per bulb. And if you would like tips on growing it, you can head to a video that Alan did to help get more people growing tulips from seed, because obviously it is a project for a patient person.
Yes. I don't know. I think Tulipa sprengeri will produce a flowering plant within about 3 years here.
Yes, but 2 things. Can I just say, first of all, if you want to grow it from seed and you don't want to risk pulling it out of your garden, sow it in a seed tray and cover the top with a layer of potting grit.
Yes.
When the bulb seed germinates, they're like little blades of grass. So don't pull them out and think they're grass, for goodness sake. And the other thing I would just say is, being a species tulip, the bulbs are much smaller than these great boiled eggs on sticks that you buy for your bedding scheme. So don't be too worried if the bulbs are small. And indeed, as Val says, quite rightly, in 3 years, you'll have a flowering plant.
And I do love the foliage. It's a really bright, vivid green foliage. I think the foliage of Tulipa sprengeri, when you see it coming up, is really exciting. I just leave it to its own devices.
Yeah.
But I haven't sort of sown it in a pot.
Well, Jane Ann Walton, the wonderful plants woman, who lots of you, well, if you're not following her on Instagram, you need to, but we've done a couple of features with her, particularly on auriculas, because she's a specialist grower of auriculas. But she did say to me, watch out if you sow it in a pot, because they have a tendency to sort of go out the bottom.
Yes.
Disappear.
Yes. A lot of things do that. Roscoas in a pot, you find that they've crept through a hole. At the bottom, they're right at the bottom of the pot, they're out the other side. I've given up with Roscoas, though. I can't grow them here. They're just not for me.
No. Well, I've got a seed tray full of Sprengeri seed that hasn't germinated yet, but what keeps happening is the place I've put it in the garden, where it's nice and sort of out of the way but sunny, it's really near my Salvia Royal Bumble, so I just have to keep getting Royal Bumble seedlings to keep turning up in the tray. Like, you're not supposed to be in there. But I do get more Royal Bumbles as a result, so that's happy. Alan, where are you at with your Flomo?
Well, it's a Flomo that I've got, and I've just bought more of it because this is a wonderful, wonderful plant. It's an alpine plant called Buchanisia. Do you know it, Val?
No, I don't think I do.
Well, it's Buchanisia caerulea. No, I've got that wrong. Sorry. Calbulica. Calbulica. It's either cal or cabulica, but Buchanisia, it's spelled Bukiniczia.
No, I don't know it at all.
It makes the most wonderful rosette of mottled pewter foliage that clings to the surface. I've got it planted in a piece of tufa on its side in one of my alpine troughs. So there, it gives you a clue to its cultivation. It wants to be moist but well drained, and it loves the liminess of tufa, and it has just spread and made this. It's like, I was going to say it's like a living thing, which of course it is, but I'm thinking more like an animal than a plant in a way.
Yes.
I mean, it's like something like a sea anemone. The way it sort of kind of clings to the surface. The pewter-coloured foliage is mottled in about 3 shades of grey and silver and pewter, and it is just the most stunning, arresting plant. It hasn't flowered yet, and when it does, apparently I can grow it from seed. But it is the kind of plant that I think it would stop you in your tracks if you saw it. It's worth looking up. So that's my moment.
I've just acquired a new book on bulbs of Iran and Turkey, published by the Alpine Garden Society. It's written, the photographs, a lot of them are taken by Peter Sheesby, and Kit Gray-Wilson has done the text. And it's a fascinating read. It's got so many colchicums and crocuses and snowdrops and all sorts of things in it. So I thought I'd just mention that. Try and plug that book.
Worth noting, if you are bamboozled by the spelling that Alan just gave out, these podcasts come with full plant lists, which you can find in the show notes. So they'll be in the show notes of the audio podcast and the video podcast, and we do visual sort of picturey ones on our social media at Get Gardening Now. And actually, they're all now on our new website. So getgardeningnow.co.uk. There's a plant list section. So all of the plant lists are listed there. So you can go back and relish all of the wonderful plants from the past 64 episodes. But certainly, if I'm listening to an audio podcast and someone says a plant I don't know, you're sort of squirreling away trying to figure out how to spell it. Hopefully, the plant lists will help.
I should be straight on the computer.
Thank you so much, Val. Yet again, just a wonderful planty chat. My heart feels full of planty goodness when we talk to you for an hour.
It's very nice for you to ask me again.
I would just like to say thank you to Val, because I've said this to her before, that every time we speak, I learn something, and I've got a page of notes here. And from Euonymus Red Cascade to Rosa Pippin, Val Bourne's seed-saving article in the Daily Telegraph is a must. I have to go and find that and read that. And it's just absolutely wonderful. 2 things I'd just like to talk about in my garden. First of all, one is impatiens, and it's impatiens that was given to me by Christopher Lloyd, impatiens balfourii. 2-turned little pink flowers. It's a hardy annual. It can be a bit invasive, but it's nowhere near as invasive as that big old balsam job. But it's still flowering away now, and it's a beautiful thing. The other thing that plant that I've had fallen in love with this year, I suppose, is Erigeron annuus, It's a white.
Oh yes, that's seeding all over my garden.
Yep, it's a white daisy that
Yes.
once you have it, hopefully you'll never lose it. But
Yes.
it's so easy to harvest the seedlings, which is what we did this year. And we just, if you're planting a new border, just put ribbons of it through the border, and it just brings the whole thing alive.
It's a great Dixter plant, isn't it? They use it there.
They do, yes.
And it's one of those cunning plants that it flowers and sets seed at the same time.
Yeah.
So you can't cut it down and prevent it from self-seeding.
No.
It's doing it at the same time.
Yeah.
And it seems a bit uncharitable to say I'm taking it out, but I am taking quite a lot of it out. And but because I haven't got this vast acreage to move it.
So you're editing where necessary.
It'd be good to live near you if you've got all these clumps of plants to give away.
Yes, well,
Shame I'm so far away.
Into our village fate.
Well, good luck with dealing with your Erigeron annuus, and thank you for regaling us with so many wonderful plants. I can't wait till the next time already. But in the meantime, happy gardening.
Happy gardening, everybody. Who's that? Look. Who's this?
Oh, Margot. Hello, Margot. Hello. Oh, sorry, Lily. Come on, come and join in. Are you jealous? Are you jealous? She's not out
That was
there.
that voice when you called Margot.
Oh no, I talked to another dog even though it wasn't here.
Here's Val.
She's gone. She's been stolen. You're really spoiling us with the show and tell, Val. This is so much.
Let's cut it out.
I will not. I refuse.